Oh, okay. So are we ready?
Ready.
Right. Okay. Right. So first of all, I'm going to discuss the political, social, economic circumstances of the rise of Napoleon. Here, my main focus in this talk is going to be on was he a product more of his circumstances, or was he just a one in a thousand-year individual or personality? I'm going to argue more in the case of the former. So the title of the talk, this is a still from a very famous 1927 film called Napoleon, and it's about 6 or 7 hours long, and it's I have actually seen it, and it was made in 1927, and my subtitle there, as you can see, is Great Man, or just a hitchhiker on the winds of history. And as you can see, he's on his boat, and the winds are blowing him away from the English who are trying to catch him, I think, at the time. Okay, so first, next slide, please. Yeah, so we'll start with a brief description of the sort of society which was existing in Europe at the time, and especially in France. So this is the court of Versailles, and there's a masquerade going on. So, and this is showing all the opulence and the splendor of the Versailles monarchy. That's the descendants of the Louis, especially Louis XIV, and Louis XVI, who was his grandson, was in power when the French Revolution happened. Now his predecessor, Louis XV, said. Famously said, "Après moi le déluge," because he was aware of all the contradictions and crises that were impinging on the sort of semi-feudalistic society. You know, there was a developing bourgeoisie, but there was also, and they had colonial possessions. They were in a conflict of interest with what was then England, soon to become Britain, but the English had got 100 years ahead of them. So the English were always more advanced than the French, because the English had already had their revolution, in fact, about 100 years beforehand, or arguably, it depends which revolution you're talking about, but there's the 1689 Glorious Revolution, so-called, but the real struggle was in the 1648 to 51 period, which we'll allude to a little bit later. Anyway, so at the top end of society, you're looking at this. So there's the opulence and splendor of the elite, or the people who think they're the elite. This is the aristocracy, and it's the same in England up to a certain degree. The English are more tied into capitalism, but in France, it's mainly a landowning aristocracy, and the money that the that the royal monopoly of the despotic monarch is able to draw from the direct from the colonies. England has already privatized the control over the merchants, but this was not yet the case in France. It was still a royal monopoly to do all the trade, which basically kept the monarchy together. Okay, we'll have the next picture. Yeah. So now this is the Bank of England in London, which so you're starting to see banks are starting to become really important, but especially in England. England's been basically run as a capitalist economy for as the French Revolution breaks out for about 100 years before as a full-blown capitalist economy, and the English bankers are some of the most powerful financial people in the world. Right, next picture. Yeah, so this gives you an idea of the on one side you have all the costumes there of that's of the aristocrats would be wearing that on the left there. That's a sort of gear they'll be wearing, and the enormous expense and extravagance of these costumes was absolutely phenomenal for both men and women. And then on the right you can see the sort of petty bourgeois small family business type thing that might be working on this. So this is the woman there on the left of that picture is obviously she's in charge there. Others are doing the others are her workers, also women, but not so fortunate as she is, and they're doing the work. And they're making up the sort of clothes which might be worn by the elite in the left-hand picture. Okay, now the question we got to ask is, where did all that money come from that they're able to spend? Well, we're going to find out in the next picture, or next three pictures, in fact. But we'll go to the next picture. Yeah. So part of it was coming from conquest and outright theft. So here we have Spanish conquistadores in Mexico, but of course they weren't the only ones who were rampaging around. But the Spanish and the Portuguese got a head start in this game, and they weren't able to hold on to it like the English were, but they did get a head start in this game. So in the 16th century, for instance, the Spanish and Portuguese are pretty much ahead of everybody in this accumulation. What Marx talks about, he talks about the primitive accumulation of capital, which is the initial capital you need to raise in order to be able to put it into things like manufacturing and so on and so forth. And this is what they were at. So it was like a move of destroying and conquering as many peoples across the world as they could get their hands on, and using their advantages in technology and so on and so forth in order to be able to do that. So that's one aspect. And the next aspect, next picture. Yeah, so this is the slave trade, or the West African slave trade. Now, the slave trade actually started, believe it or not, with European slaves. But European slaves were dying far too quickly in the Caribbean, where they were being forced to work on sugar and coffee plantations, and so it was cheaper to get Africans to do it, and this is the main reason why they switched to the great African the great African diaspora from the west coast of Africa to the Americas, and everybody was at it. You know, nobody was free from blaming this. The French were at it, the Spanish were at it, the Portuguese were at it, the Dutch were at it, and the English were at it, and the English would eventually come to dominate the slave trade at the end of the 17th century. They came to dominate the slave trade, and this was another means of accumulating capital, because if you can get people to work, to be worked into the ground basically until they die on your plantations for no money, then you're able to accumulate quite a bit of capital. And this was what was going on. This is actually a picture from an abolitionist campaign, which is exposing what was going on in the slave trade much later on. Once the English had decided that they made enough money from the slave trade, they thought it was time to move on and to invest that money elsewhere. It wasn't for any great moral reasons or anything. So you've got the money coming in to start off capitalism, and that's coming in, as we said already, from conquest and theft, like gold and all the rest of it, and then from the slave trade, working people to death on the plantations, and then the third part of this equation is we'll deal with in the next picture. Next picture, please. Yeah. So this is the squalor which a hell of a lot of people in cities, both Paris and London in particular, would have been living in. But also in any of the big metropolises. Now, where most of these people come from? Well, they came from all over, but by and large, they came from the country of their origins. So the vast majority of the people living in the slums in the English cities, for example, were English. And where did they come from? How come they ended up living in such dreadful conditions? Well, the reason was that they'd been forced off the land. They'd been expropriated, basically. This is why in the 18th century, there was a big campaign to drive up rents, and because of the change in property relations and the collapse of common law and things like, and because feudalism, despite how bad it was, it did protect the tenants to a degree. This was no longer in place. So it's like peasants would be driven off the land, and they either starved or they started to work in the factories. And this is the start of the Industrial Revolution. Once again, it's this is where the money is coming from. It's basically another form of slavery, except that you either have a choice. You have a choice to starve to death, or you have a choice to work yourself to death. So for a pittance, and of course, lots of people are making money out of it. And this is where the money for the capitalist system is coming from. Okay, we'll move on to the next picture now. Right. So this is a scene from, I think it's 1791, the storming of the palace of Tuileries in Paris. This is the start of the French Revolution. French Revolution kicks off with because it's been inspired by partly what happened in England, though the French weren't anywhere near ready for it when it kicked off in England, but they were becoming more and more the ancien regime was becoming weaker and weaker, and all they were waiting for was as Louis XV said, après moi le déluge, after me the flood, basically. So he knew that what was coming down the pipeline. What happened was that directly triggered this was the American Revolution, so-called, where they had thrown off British power. There's been some quite interesting studies of the American Revolution recently, which seem to imply that it was less to do with getting freedoms and all the rest of it, and more to do with the fact that the English were thinking about stopping the slave trade. The abolitionist movement was gaining ground, and that's why the United States, or what would become the United States, wanted independence, because they still needed to that primitive accumulation of capital. So anyway, the French Revolution, I'm sure I'm not going to go into great detail about this, starts with the storming of the Bastille. Then there's a constitutional monarchy for a short while, and then it becomes progressively more radical, and then it becomes by 1792, then you have an invasion, this is from Prussia and Austria in collusion with the French aristocracy and with the French royal family. Now this has to be properly understood. The reason for the terror, the so-called terror, is because of that, and arguably the terror is what prevented the French Revolution from being crushed instantly, because the generals who were leading the Prussian and Austrian armies boasted. They said, when we get to Paris, we will raze it to the ground. they were so I mean, who was more terroristic? Was it the Committee for Public Safety, or was it the Austrians and Prussian aristocrats? I don't know. Okay, we can have the next picture. Yeah, so so they execute the king, which the English had already done in 1648, and the French do it in I think it's 1792 is the year, because he was basically colluding with these two armies, bloodthirsty armies of the Austrians and Prussians, who were going to destroy Paris. I mean, yeah. So anyway, so he is executed, and this starts off as I was talking about earlier, the so-called terror. And one has to realize that we have a group of people in power at this time, the Jacobins. Now, the Jacobins are people who identify with, they are actually mostly middle-class people, but they identify very strongly with the poorest of Paris's citizens, the working class. And they also had a long history of being opposed to slavery. And the first thing that they do when they take power is that they abolish slavery, and that is a really big thing. It's much bigger than executing the king. The English had done it 100 years previously. The big thing is that they abolish slavery, and institute the rights of man. Oh, and obviously the rights of women hadn't been considered at this point, but people were writing about it over in England. Mary Wollstonecraft was already writing about the rights of women. The rights of man obviously comes from Thomas Paine. Okay, we can go on to the next one now. Yeah, so this is some wealthy person making a petition to the directory, or le directoire. Now, the directory, or took power more or less with the Thermidorian reaction, which was when the constitutional monarchs and the bourgeoisie, who didn't want the abolition of slavery because they were making huge amounts of money out of it, especially around Bordeaux and places like that, and they didn't want that. So so the Thermidorian reaction, they wipe out the Jacobins, or as many Jacobins as they can get their hands on, and that's when Robespierre and all the rest of them are disposed of under the guillotine again, and the directory takes over. Now, the directory is very unstable. It doesn't really hold much much power. People don't trust it, because it's basically, you've got the high bourgeoisie and who are making lots of money, and they're the ones basically who are running the directory, and there's always a threat of Jacobin, another Jacobin revolution, especially in Paris, and so they want to be able to deal with that. So how do they deal with it? They start wars. I mean, some wars were already going on and so on and so forth, but the English and the other aristocratic powers were trying to get we're trying for a counter revolution, and which is in the outer regions of France at the time. But the English they and the English are playing a big role in this at the moment, which I'll come back to later on, because the English keep the whole thing kicking over, even under Napoleon. They're sort of keeping the whole thing going, but anyway, but the Directory are looking for, because they're afraid of the Jacobins, they are wanting to distract everybody with wars. So they hit upon the idea of exporting the revolution, exporting it to Italy, exporting it to Germany, exporting it to the Low Countries, things like this here, because there have been some radical changes in the army, which I'm sure Philippe will talk much more about. But there were already quite radical changes in the army and in military tactics are going on, and have been ever since the Battle of Valmy, which defeats the Austrian and Prussian armies that I was talking about earlier. But anyway, so the Directory are very weak. They're very divided. They all hate each other, and they're all seeking power after each other, and so the army becomes and they're wanting to distract attention for everybody. So they send all the sans-culottes, that's the people who didn't have any trousers because they weren't wealthy enough. They send them all off to fight in these wars, and they hope that that'll take the trouble away from them. And in that mixture of events, and that tumultuous mixture of events, that's when Napoleon starts to make his name. And he actually is responsible for repulsing the English at Toulon in 1795. Then he's given a posting in Italy, where he does very well there as well, or seems to, as I say. We will talk about this. Is it real, or is it just luck or whatever? But anyway, he is building. He sees his opportunity, and he's building. He's already building a myth about himself. He's already building an idea of where he wants to get to and how he's going to get it, and he's prepared to be utterly ruthless to do it. But he's being helped. We can have the next picture. Yes, he's being helped by the he's being helped from within the Directory itself. So when he overthrows the Directory, which he does, and he establishes himself at First Consul, it's with the collusion of the Directory, because they themselves are realizing we need a strong man in here, or else our big money-making ventures are going to fall apart. And Napoleon has decided to play himself as the perfect solution to this. So he comes in as a he's very clever, Napoleon. He can play the I'm a Jacobin really card, and he can play the I'm a Thermidorian card as well. We can see which side he was really on by having a look at his wife. His wife was from Martinique, where she was from a very wealthy slave-owning family. So his girlfriend, later his wife, and his most the one of his lovers that he particularly was the most had the most favor with him. She was from slave owning families, so I mean they would have been pressurizing him if nobody else was. We need to accumulate capital to rival the English, and this is what this cartoon really sums up. It's actually a Whig cartoon, I think. Now the Whigs were the opposition in England at the time. The Tories were in power, and they were represented by Pitt, who's the character in red on the left, and as you can see, and then you've got a caricature of Napoleon on the right, and it's supposed to really attack both the Tories and Napoleon, but it's actually quite right picture, because this is what they were doing. And Napoleon wanted to carve up or get a slice of the pie for France. And the English said, no, we want all the pie. And the French were saying, no, we want some, and never mind the people who are getting sliced up. So this is quite a good picture, because it's called The Plum Pudding in Danger, and which is fine as long as your name's William Pitt or Napoleon Bonaparte. But if you're anybody else who's been carved up in the process, it's not so great. Okay, we can move on we're going to talk about the characteristics of Napoleonic power. Right, okay, so we've got two pictures here of Napoleon's crossing of the Alps in, I think it's 1799, 1800, something like that. And what you have here, you've got this romantic image of Napoleon, which is the dominant one that you get of him. He's this great man who's in a very high status pose, and he's on a rearing horse, and his men are all around him and all the rest of it. And he's looking very dashing and gallant and all the rest of it. And then you've got this other one on the right, which is much more. It's still a little bit like that, but it's much more down to earth and probably realistic. Well, Napoleon wanted the sort of image that were being created on the left, and he was encouraging the arts. He was encouraging the secularization of education. He was trying to take the church out of everywhere he invaded. He was introducing the French system, or the current French system. So it was like breaking down a lot of the feudal relics that were still hanging around in Europe. Now, the question is, like, did he have the right to do that? Well, it depends where he went. I mean, he was very popular in parts of Italy, for instance. A lot of the Italian, the bourgeoisies or the wannabe bourgeoisies of parts of Germany and parts of Italy, for instance, were actually very much in his support, and they actually provided lots of troops for his armies and so on and so forth. So I mean, it's debatable as to whether it was a right or a wrong thing to do. The thing is that it was all part of this broader process of events. Okay, we can go on to the next picture now. Yeah, so I mean, this is another one of these quite lavish and propagandistic pictures. This is from Napoleon's coronation in 1804, 1805. I think he was actually crowned emperor in 1804, but this is the big one that he did in Milan with the Pope present, because being a canny sort of guy, he was never committed in the same way as the Jacobins were. I mean, the Jacobins didn't like war. They thought there shouldn't be wars of expansion, for instance. They thought that the French should just deal with their own problems first, and they shouldn't even try and invade other people. But Napoleon obviously threw that one under the bus, and he also threw up. Well, he didn't take the secularism to its ultimate like the Jacobins did. He actually made compromises with the Catholic Church because it was going to improve his power. So it's a sort of divinely secular form of authority in which he starts to wield. Okay, next picture. Yeah, so you've got a cult of personality, which we've just been talking about. He also had magazines and newspapers which were informing everybody what a great guy he was the whole time, and he'd been very conscious of that. Been very conscious of the increasing role of the press, of the development of your image and your power. So like when he was being pictured and stuff, he always had himself in certain poses, with his hand in his pocket and so on and so forth. This was considered to indicate he was in control and everything like this. And so he had not only the artists working for him, he also had the press working for him, and that was working especially well in France, because people since the revolution, people have been reading lots more. There are loads of pamphlets were coming out every day. Napoleon jumped on that bandwagon too, and so this is actually the Battle of the Pyramids. This shows again that this is the cult of empire. He had these grandiose dreams of an empire to rival the British, or maybe even defeat the British. So he launched these campaigns, for instance, to Egypt, to try and conquer Egypt. The idea being to intercept Britain, not so much of Egypt, but the conduct of the Egyptian campaign was very racist. I have to say that the massacres that were carried out there, probably there was nothing like it until the Peninsular War, except for what they did in the West Indies, because they made a truce with Britain, and then they went back to the West Indies under the truce, where the slaves had freed themselves of slavery, and in the French colonies they ruthlessly and brutally crushed. This is Napoleon. This is about 1802, 1803. He's doing this, and he's trying to crush all those revolutions, and only one of them survived, and that's the one which is now Haiti in what was then known as San Domingo. But this is so as I say, what is he trying to do here? Is he trying to confront the English, or is he just trying to ape the English? That's another good question one can raise. Okay, so we can go on to the next picture. Yeah, so these endless wars and conquests to, again, it was the policy of the Directory to distract attention from ever more critical post-revolutionary internal contradictions within France itself. And in this conflict, he was being assisted by the fact that the English were, indeed, being perfidious Albion, and they were messing around. They were financing, because England was the richest country in the world. They were financing all the other powers of Europe to fight Napoleon. So Napoleon doesn't have all the blame himself for these endless series of wars, but he does bear a lot of the responsibility for it. And he doesn't seem to have had any compunction about getting thousands of men killed in battle, or abandoning them like he did it with the Egyptian expedition, for instance, or in Russia much later on. He just doesn't. He has this sort of almost pathological disregard for human life. Okay, so this is actually in a scene from 1808 in Spain, where the local people, fed up with being ordered around by Napoleon, got up and tried to kill some of his soldiers. His soldiers may look Turkish. That's probably because they are. They were Mamluks, who were so elite, had become, since the Egyptian expedition, had become elite troops in Napoleon's army. Okay, so next picture. Yeah, so all of this eventually leads to tyranny, as we've already talked about. He starts throwing his weight about, starts conscripting troops, not only from France. He runs out of troops in France. I would take slight issue with Philippe on this regarding the small armies. Yes, he had small armies known as corps, but the corps were actually part of the much larger army called the Grand Army, and the Grand Army was enormous. the conscription on these levels and the numbers of troops in battles hadn't been seen in history before. Like on all sides, huge numbers of people fighting, and because of the lack of medicine care to keep up with it, there were lots and lots of people being either critically crippled or killed as a result. Anyway, this is a famous picture of Napoleon on his way to St. Helena towards the end of his life, after defeat at Waterloo, with his entourage looking on at him while he's standing alone and sulking at the other end. So as I say, all this hubris leads to tyranny and downfall. Right. Now we're going to contrast the myths and opinions about Napoleon as a man and as a historical figure. So, for, against, was he a military genius? Well, we can have a look at the next picture. Yeah, this is it. I mean, there's quite a obviously he did have military talents. I'm not going to deny that. He obviously was very capable. He was of being a good general, and he knew how to lead troops. He knew how to get troops devoted to him on a personal level, which was very important in the sort of battles that were being fought at the time. But I mean, this is just the classic example. I mean, there are other battles which one could argue about, but I'm not really going to go into great details about them because we haven't got the time. But this is a scene from the retreat from Moscow in 1812. Now, he raised an army of nearly 500,000 men from all over Europe. There were even Austrians and Prussians in his army. And there were Germans, and there were Italians, and there were Dutch, and as well French in the army. Now, he'd really looked at his history books. He would have gone, well, this isn't really a good idea. Let's have a look at other campaigns in recent times where this hasn't, and how they went. And there was one quite recent, only 100 years before, the Swedes had tried to do the same thing, and almost exactly the same thing had happened to the Swedes in Russia. And the Poles as well. The Poles had tried, and the Poles had come to grief as well. So in much the same sort of way, it was the huge expanse of the country, the impossibility to organize logistics in it, with the primitive road system and primitive transport systems. It was an impossible undertaking. But he raises an army of 500,000 men, and he goes and he tries to do it, and he comes back with 30,000 of them left. I mean, can that really be argued as being a sign of military genius? The Russians play a very cautious game, and they don't fight until they absolutely think that they've got the upper hand, and then Napoleon attacks. The biggest battle of the 1812 campaign is fought at Borodino, very famous battle, of course. Thousands and thousands of people killed on both sides, but the Russians can take those losses, whereas the French and their their allies can't. What a lot of people also don't realize is that this people think it was the winter that did in the army, but actually the army was suffering long before the winter set in. They were suffering from complete logistical breakdown, and they were being attacked by peasants. These are French prisoners of war being taken by peasants, and they were being attacked in the rear, and their supply chains were all over the place. Now, any like how is that an example of military genius? I really don't see it. He'd obviously been overtaken by hubris at some point. Arguably, even was way back as his greatest achievement, probably Austerlitz battle. You could argue that it set in then. But anyway, and once again, at Waterloo, Leipzig, various other places, he makes some quite catastrophic mistakes, and I'm sure Philippe's going to argue it was hubris that did him in. It's just, when did that start? Okay, so we can move on to the next one. Right, this is, was he a great statesman? Well, that's the Treaty at Tilsit in 1807, where Alexander III of Russia charms Napoleon into saying, we all hate the English and blah blah blah, but he doesn't mean a word of it, and Napoleon falls for it hook, line, and sinker. I mean, that's just the classic example. I mean, can one really say he was throughout his life he was a great statesman if he did things like that? Again, he also made up alliances which he dropped with the Sultan of Turkey and with the Shah of Iran, and these really didn't. These are quite random alliances that really didn't go anywhere. I mean, what was he playing at there as well? Okay, we'll have the next picture. Or was he just an opportunist who happened to be in the right place at the right time? I mean, there are several characters around this era who could have been could have been a Napoleon. Several characters in France at the time who could have been a Napoleon, but for some reason or another, maybe they got killed in battle, or they just didn't have the same resources or the same contacts that Napoleon had. Now, this is Napoleon taking over in the 18 Brumaire, 18 Brumaire. This is when he's taking over the as first consul and kicking out the Council of 500. This is a close-up from that famous picture. But it gives Napoleon a bit of a heroic pose and all the rest of it. It also gives the Council of the 500 a heroic pose, which they don't deserve either, because most of them were actually in collusion with him. They weren't actually against him. him doing what he did. So you know, I mean, there's a good argument to make that he was an opportunist. Next picture. Yeah, now this is the typical British propaganda that was running around at the time. Now the British obviously had a lot of influence, and this is how they like to display Napoleon as the Corsican ogre, with a sort of bloodthirsty maniac, surrounded by an army of degenerates and subhumans. It's quite racist in itself, actually. This cartoon, it's a little bit like the other one which we were talking earlier, but as I think this one's much more overtly racist, and it's I think it's another one of these Whig cartoons. But this is a sort of image that the English were trying to present of Napoleon, that is this personification of evil. Well, I wouldn't say you know, yes to a degree, but no to another end of the spectrum, because as I say, we've been exploring, you know, he was taking down a lot of this feudal rubbish, which was holding the rest of Europe back. And that's why the British didn't want him, because the British just wanted to accumulate more and more capital themselves, and they didn't want any rivals, especially didn't want the French. They'd been in conflict with the French even before the revolution, before Napoleon, obviously, and they were able to exploit the fear that the Russians, the Austrians, Prussian aristocrats and dynastic monarchs felt about Napoleon. They were able to exploit that with propaganda like this, which sort of portrayed, which played into their fears, and when combined with British manufactured goods and British money, that was actually quite effective, and it's one of the things that kept the whole Napoleonic Wars going. And that mustn't be forgotten. As I say, Napoleon was very aggressive, and he did engage in a whole lot of utterly pointless campaigns and on wars and things. But at the same time, he was being, as he would have argued himself, in fact, he was always being pushed by England. Well, yeah, you are, but you bear some of the responsibility yourself, mate. Okay, so we move on to the next one. Now, this is another still from the Jacobins film, Napoleon, in 1927, and this shows the ghosts. Now, this is after he shut down the National Assembly. He goes into the empty assembly, and the ghosts of the revolutionaries, especially the Jacobins, are all present, and they're watching him, and he feels under pressure. Now, the Jacobins film is quite interesting, because the Jacobins film, he actually intended to make it the whole of his life, but he only takes it as far as him becoming first consul, and then he ran out of money while he was doing this. So one can imagine that well, certainly the impression I got from this scene is that it was going that this appearance of the ghost was going to come back and haunt him later on. When he crowns himself emperor, I think they were going to appear in the crowd. You know, the ghosts are going to appear again in the crowd and things like this here, which is going to make the movie much less of a eulogy of the man and more critical. Anyway, so the thing is, he jumped on the bandwagon of the revolution, and he was unashamed about that. I think he actually really did believe in that he was the best thing for France, and that he was in his own mind, he was carrying out the revolutionary duties, but you know, between thought and action, there's a gap, and you know, he can definitely be I mean, some of it was quite cynical, so you have to ask him as well. I mean, was he an usurper? You know, was he just using the tricolor? Was he just using the imposition of the Napoleonic Code and all the rest of it? Was he just using that for his own ends? Which is a good point. Okay, we'll have the next picture. Yeah, so these are now Tolstoy, this is a scene from Bondarchuk's film of War and Peace, which I recommend anybody who's interested in this era and in Napoleon and 1812 and everything else. You definitely need to see the Bondarchuk movie of this. The Russian one, it goes on for about 8 hours. It gives the whole story from Tolstoy's point of view. Now, Tolstoy would have argued that Napoleon was basically quite an ordinary man, but he's propelled forward by events, historical events, and his personal delusions of grandeur and invincibility. So here you can see, I mean, that's the young Napoleon at Austerlitz. Movie, obviously he wasn't being photographed, but it does sort of present this picture of him as much more of an ordinary person. And then this is a picture of his last few years on Saint Helena, where he's basically a fat, balding man, which makes him look very, very ordinary as well. So I just thought I'd chuck those two pictures in there to back up the Tolstoyan conclusions. Right, we can move on to the next picture. Yes, so the legacy of Napoleon, well, the later French Empire, well, you know, I mean, Napoleon would probably have approved of that. Whether we can approve of it is another matter altogether. French Empire was just as destructive as any other empire that was emerging from Europe, like the British Empire, like the Belgian Empire, which a lot of people don't realize about as well. Belgian Empire was very destructive. Germans too. A lot of quite the origins of where the world is today, in fact, arise out of Italy. Italy had a go as well. And here, anyway, you can see that this is the French Foreign Legion, which I'm sure Napoleon would have loved the idea of, except he was long gone before it came about. Okay, we can move on to the next picture. So you got the EU. Well, maybe the EU is a sort of indirect descendant of the Napoleonic period, certainly the Napoleonic Code, which he implemented all over Europe, and that's had a big influence on how a lot of, especially Western Europe, sees property rights, how it sees your equality before the law, the type of representative democracy which is being used, and so on and so forth. A lot of these, and driving on the right-hand side of the road, another one. A lot of these, ideas come from the Napoleonic Code, and arguably, it's the origin of the EU. Well, the EU is mainly run by Germany, of course. Now, it is, France. France is probably the second biggest power. Britain's decided to leave, so them to it. So it's pretty much Germany and France's game, because everybody else has been more or less relegated to secondary status. And if you're someplace like Greece, of course, you're relegated to even lower status. So it's just sort of carrying on some of the same traditions. Now, whether you like those traditions or not is another matter. But that is, yes, you could argue that there is some argument for that. Okay, last couple of pictures. The next picture, yeah. So this is, can we compare him, to get other people in history? Well, the three ones which people like to come up with is Cromwell, who's the one on the left, Stalin, the one in the middle, or Hitler on the right. Okay, well, Cromwell's actually probably the closest, to be quite honest. Cromwell was somebody who arose out of the English Revolution in 1648-51, and he was a strong man, again, a bit like Napoleon, and he left his mark on the country, and he instituted some of the changes which the English bourgeoisie, in the same way as the Napoleon introduced a lot of the changes which the French bourgeoisie took advantage of. Cromwell did the same sort of thing, and he was similarly controversial character, controversial policies, controversial brutality, etc., etc. Military man. So probably Cromwell's the closest. The guy in the middle, well, that's Uncle Joe, and Stalin is really not a very good comparison, because Stalin mostly killed off his own people, and he was mostly killing off people within the Communist Party, in fact. Now, Napoleon didn't really do that, so did a whole lot of other things, not so savory, but he didn't do that. So Stalin was also accumulating capital. What I would call he was going through an internal process of primitive accumulation of capital within within the USSR, and that's what led to all the famines and the gulags and everything like that. So so you see, Stalin's focus was just on the USSR and especially Russia. He wasn't interested in taking the revolution or the changes anyway elsewhere. He was much less interested in that, and he was just interested really in building up Russia. And so that's almost like the direct opposite of Napoleon. You could say Trotsky is closer to Napoleon than Stalin was, because Trotsky wanted the Red Army to overrun the entire world and bring revolution to them, etc., etc. Much more than Stalin did, much more. The guy on the right, well, yes, I mean, it's up to a certain degree, but it's sort of Hitler. Yes, I mean the campaign, the sort of single-mindedness and this sort of maniacal vision of launching one war after the next war and after the next war, yeah, and using new tactics, and honing those tactics. Yes, I mean Hitler and his minions were definitely around that. The difference, I think, is, well, I mean, Hitler was a genocidal maniac, and I don't think Napoleon could be really called a genocidal maniac. You know, if people died because of his policies, well, that was just too bad. But it wasn't like he actually wanted to wipe people out in the same way as Hitler did. And in fact, Napoleon was very much pro-Semitic. He wanted the Jews to no longer be constrained by into ghettos and persecuted in the law. He wanted everybody to be equal. So, which Hitler did not want. Hitler had a very racial view. I mean, Napoleon had racial views of Black people, definitely, and he and arguably also against other peoples as well, but it wasn't quite of the same virulence as Hitler. So I think that comparison doesn't really tie up either. Okay, so we can move on to the last picture now. Yeah. So this is just a throwaway at the end here. This is these are three people who sort of been compared to Napoleon, who emerged around about the same time, and they also emerged in colonies. The man on the right there, probably most people from Latin America will instantly recognize who that is. It's Simon de Bolivar, who is, of course, a national hero. He took advantage of Napoleon's policies in Europe to kick off a revolution in Latin America. and he was helped by the people on the, or the descendants of the people on the left, who we'll talk about now, because they are quite that the figure on the far left is Toussaint de Louverture, who's sometimes seen as the Black Napoleon. He organized. He was a political leader more than a military leader, but he was pretty good militarily as well, and he was part of the reason why the English, well, actually the English did invade Haiti as well, but why the French were never able to reconquer Haiti, and he fought against Napoleon's generals, who had been delegated with the task of capturing Haiti, and he was betrayed in the end, and he spent most of the rest of his life in a French. Well, he spent the rest of his life in a French prison where he died, and the character in the middle there is he was a brilliant military leader. He's called Dessalines, and he was the first emperor of Haiti. He didn't have any of the political nous that Toussaint de Louverture had. Toussaint de Louverture was very well educated and very well, very politically astute, whereas Dessalines unfortunately wasn't. But he was he was an outstanding military general of the same period, and it was his army that eventually kicked out the French out of Haiti. Okay, well, I'm going to leave it there now. So that's it.
Okay, I think you can start with your presentation, Philippe.
Okay. I put my contacts on the chat because I had to leave in half an hour. And if you want to ask me a question, if I'm too short or because I really have to leave, I'm sorry, in half an hour. So thank you, Kevin, for the presentation. And I may cut my video because I don't know if the line is very good from Portugal. That's where I'm based now. So I start the share screen. And, okay. So if you see anything, do you see something? I mean,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So me, my ways of presenting is a bit different, but it's okay. I just have to make sure it works. Yeah, it doesn't want to move, but let's make it bigger. So definitely doesn't want to work my way, so it's okay. I'll try another way. 1 minute. So maybe it's better, Alexandro, you put your own my slide because I cannot move them here. I don't know why. Alexandro, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can share for you eventually.
Yeah, please do that because I don't know what happened with my computer. I'll try again, but
okay, 1 second.
Yeah, it's too slow.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, just put yours and I will move it.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Give me 1 second.
Okay. So me, as you know, I'm only talking about strategy, nothing else. As you know, how he made some battles. Basically, it's always the same tactic. And according to me, when he didn't apply or